If the Federal Reserve has proven anything over the last 18 months, it is that the inflation genie is hard to put back in the bottle. The Fed has been reducing the size of their balance sheet, and they've been raising interest rates consistently, yet inflation is still sticking around. Now, many people blame this on the trillions of new dollars that were printed in 2020 and 2021. People also blame the years of zero interest rate policy that stuck around way too long, leading to excessive risk and debt buildup. But the effect that high interest rates are now having on the economy may end up being far more damaging in the long run. In fact, keeping rates too high for too long could end capitalism as we know it and replace it with something far worse. Real quick, a word from today's sponsor, McAlvany Precious Metals. It's no secret that today banks are falling like dominoes. So the question is, how do you know if your bank is safe? In times like this, the name of the game is always counterparty risk, which is essentially just the degree to which you have to trust or rely on somebody else to give back to you what they promised they will give to you. This is why investors like investing in things like physical gold and silver, because if you have it, you don't have to trust that somebody else will give it to you. This is not the case with banks though, which today means many people are asking the question, is my bank safe? Can I trust my bank that they'll give me back the dollars that they owe me? This is where the McAlvany Trusted Precious Metals Advisors come in. Right now, they're offering a free consultation with you in order to go over your bank and provide you a detailed analysis on whether your bank is stable and safe. They do this by providing a bank safety rating, which is a composite of hundreds of factors synthesized into 5 indexes: the bank's capitalization, asset quality, profitability, liquidity, and stability. Putting these all together, you can see what your bank is invested in to learn whether your bank is safe, is stable, and has the liquidity that it needs. This will give you the information you need to make an informed decision about what you should be doing with your portfolio and your investments. The expert precious metals advisors at McAlvany Precious Metals are here and ready to assist you in analyzing your bank, looking over your cash holdings, and making individual personalized recommendations for you about your investments. Sign up for your free bank safety rating consultation with the link in the description below. In order to understand the effect that high interest rates are having on free markets, we first have to understand what prices really are. So first, prices are discovered through an auction process. In the free market, there's no committee, there's no agency, there's no supreme leader dictating what prices are for anything. They're discovered through an auction process very similar to eBay. You have some people that have an item that they would like to sell. You also have some people that would like to acquire that item. Through an auction process of bidding, you have a price that is arrived at. Sellers obviously want to sell it for the highest price possible, and buyers obviously want to pay the lowest price possible. All prices everywhere are negotiable, even large items sold by large corporations through large distribution centers or warehouses, as everybody has seen recently with the Bud Light scandal. Recently, a picture of a coupon for a pack of 24 cans of Bud Light that normally sells for $19.98, offering a $20 back rebate, has been going viral online. This is a very clear demonstration that all prices are negotiated through an auction process, and when suddenly the market says we don't want to buy that thing anymore, sellers will be forced to drop their prices until they get to a point where buyers do want to buy them again. This highlights the second thing about prices, in which prices are subjective. This means that prices and value is not determined. There's no objective value assigned to anything. People make buying decisions, therefore influencing prices based off of subjective values and wants. And so if you see a loaf of bread that's normally $5 on sale for $1, you may think, hey, that's a great deal. That bread is worth more than $1, so I'm gonna buy 2 or 3 loaves of bread. But you are not making a value statement that that bread is objectively worth more than $1. Otherwise, you would empty your bank account to get all the loaves of bread you could and then resell them for more. Instead, what you're actually saying is that loaf of bread is worth more to me than that dollar. And you may buy 4, maybe even 5 loaves of bread. But at that 6th loaf of bread, you no longer think that that 6th loaf of bread is worth more than your 6th dollar. You now more value that sixth dollar than you do that sixth loaf of bread. Which points us towards the third thing about prices, is that they communicate information about scarcity. When something is overly abundant relative to everything else, the price will go down, all else being equal. When something is scarce relative to everything else, the price will go up, all else being equal. This year, if there's some sort of infection or plague that wipes out 90% of the wheat harvest, that means that only 10% of the wheat will be left. That means there will be less bread made than there was last year. It will be more scarce. You don't need any expert that knows all about the supply chains for bread, who knows all the ingredients that go into bread and the transportation and who creates the things that transport those and who makes the plastic bags out of the petroleum. There's millions of people involved in the production of just one single loaf of bread and getting that to your grocery store where you can then take it home. But nobody in that process needs to know anything about the growing and the harvesting of wheat and the fact that there was some sort of a plague that wiped out 90% of the wheat harvest. The prices will dictate that scarcity. The bread companies will bid up the prices and buy as much wheat as they can, but ultimately they'll only be able to buy 10% of the wheat in total than they did the year before, because you can only consume what has been produced. And these prices will make their way through to you, the consumer, and you will take a look at that bread that's maybe $15 now instead of $5, and you may decide, I want zero bread. Somebody else may decide, I want some, but just not as much. And then somebody else, like a bakery, may decide, no, I still need all the bread, and they'll pay those higher prices. In doing so, prices communicate information about scarcity to the market without any understanding necessary of how that thing became scarce or abundant. This allows for the proper allocation of resources. For instance, in America, Americans may choose to eat less bread as a result of it being triple the price because we have other food we can eat instead. But somewhere where they heavily rely on bread, maybe like in Egypt for most of their daily caloric intake, they may be forced to pay those higher prices. And then those resources of the more scarce bread will be allocated where they're needed the most, to Egyptians instead of Americans. Now that we understand prices, let's move over to money. How does money work? There are many different characteristics about money and many things we can say about how money works, but one thing that is often overlooked is that money is a claim on wealth, not wealth itself. If money was wealth itself, then everybody would be better off if we just printed more money and deposited it into everybody's accounts. If the Fed printed $1 million per person and gave each person $1 million, everybody would be better off because they'd have more wealth. But as we know, if they just print a bunch of money and that's the only thing they do and hand it out to people, well, then the prices of everything go up to compensate because we didn't make more stuff. We just made more claims on that stuff. And then when we go to redeem our claims on that stuff, the real wealth, well, everybody's bidding up those prices. And so the prices go up because everybody's trying to get them. And so money just represents a claim on wealth. This highlights the second thing about money in that it is the place where you store the value of your wealth until you're ready to redeem it for wealth. For instance, you go to work all day for 8 hours, you give up your time, which is an example of real wealth, and you get in return money. At some point then you will turn around and you will redeem that money, which is a claim on wealth, for real wealth, like a shirt to wear or food to eat or a roof over your head. And you can store the value of your wealth in that claim on wealth for as long as you'd like. But one thing that makes people not want to do that very much is that there are new units, new claims on wealth being created by the Fed. So the longer you wait to redeem your claim on wealth, the more claims on wealth there are in circulation, and your claim on wealth, you won't be able to redeem it for as much wealth as you could have originally. That's called inflation. This highlights the fact that the way that supply and demand works on prices has the same effect on money, that the price of money will increase or decrease along with the scarcity or the abundance of that money. For instance, if every single person decided to save all of their money and decided not to spend a dime, well, prices would start to collapse because suddenly the money supply, meaning the amount of money that's actually out there in circulation, would drop to near zero because nobody's spending anything. And when the supply of something becomes very scarce, its price goes up. And when the price or the value of money goes up, relative to all the stuff, that means you can get more wealth for that money. $1 might buy you a car instead of a gumball. On the flip side, if everybody spends all their money extremely rapidly, well, then the amount of money going out into circulation is a lot higher than it was. So everybody's bidding up prices. That money is worth less than it was before. The prices or the value of money is also dictated by supply and demand, just like the prices of anything. One of the most common markers of the price or the value of money is the interest rate on money. It's how much it costs to get your hands on new money right now. So if the interest rate is 5%, it costs you $5 to acquire $100. Just like prices of bread influence who can consume the bread, who can afford that bread, and how much bread is purchased, the price of money does the exact same thing. Higher interest rates incentivize saving, and lower interest rates incentivize spending. Said another way, if the savings pool is large and everybody has a ton of savings, then all the savers are competing for stuff to do with their money to try and put it to work. And so if I'm a borrower and everybody is a saver and trying to be a lender, I'm going to be able to have the lenders compete against each other, and I'm going to get a pretty good rate. Alternatively, if I'm a borrower and everybody is a borrower and there's only one person with any savings, so the savings pool is small and there's not an abundance of money out there, then we're all competing against each other to borrow, so the lender is going to be able to demand a very high interest rate. It's all just supply and demand. And the price of money, the interest rate, dictates or it indicates, it sends information about how scarce or abundant the money supply is, and it influences behavior downstream of that. Now let's talk about price controls for a second. Price controls are simply when an agency, a government, a regulator, or a dictator steps in and says, instead of allowing two people to come together through an auction process and freely choose what amount they are going to exchange items for of their own volition by their own choice, me as a third party, I'm going to step in and tell them what they must transact for. So if I set the price of an item too low relative to what it would be without me setting it, a shortage will happen because that price will be sending information to the economy that that item is more abundant than it actually is. Therefore, economic actors will buy more of it than they should, and a shortage will occur because there's not enough of it. On the other hand, if me as a price controller sets the price too high artificially, higher than it would be otherwise without my intervention, then that means that a glut will take place because the information that that price is sending to economic actors is that that item is very scarce. And so not enough people will buy it. And again, the resources will not be allocated correctly. It is vital to understand that the Federal Reserve controlling interest rates is price controls on money. When the Federal Reserve had interest rates at 0% through all of 2020 and 2021, and they had interest rates near 0% from 2009 through 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15, it is almost a certainty that the price of money was too low. That price control was artificially lower than it would have been otherwise. And the longer and more the Fed raises interest rates right now, the higher the chances are that the price of money will become too expensive. If you are controlling the price of something, how would you know whether or not you are setting it at the correct price? The question of what is the correct price leads us into the next section, which is, what is capitalism? What are free markets? Well, many people have defined this in many different ways, but in my opinion, the simplest way to describe it is that people are allowed to transact by choice. Said another way, the rights of the individual are extended to the property that that individual owns, and that the place of law in a free market is limited to one thing, which is the collective enforcement of individual rights. That's it. And so capitalism or free markets cannot be regulated, it cannot be supported, it cannot be subsidized, because to the extent that it is, it just ceases to be free markets. I am an entity separate from my body, and I have individual rights and sovereignty over my body. And those rights extend to everything that I own, which includes my body and includes my property. And so if I choose to transact with somebody else who is also freely exercising their rights over their property, and we shake hands and we want to exchange items with each other, products with each other, money with each other, or services with each other, there is no third party that has a right to stop that. And to the extent that those free actions are stopped, limited, other actions are coerced, you take steps farther and farther away from free markets and capitalism. Which brings us to how the Federal Reserve is using interest rates to kill capitalism. With normal goods, physical goods, services, things that require physical human input to create, you can only control them so much before the problems end up stopping the possibility of those regulations. For instance, if you try and impose price controls on something like bread too heavily and it results in shortages, well then a black market will absolutely appear. People will start smuggling bread and it will start being transacted at higher prices that are different from the price controls in order to make it possible to allocate those resources where they are necessary. The regulations will end up defeating themselves. But with something like money that is 100% controlled and issued by an entity like the Federal Reserve, you don't have those natural limitations built in. The Federal Reserve is literally the source of infinite dollars. So how is this killing free markets? Number one, money is half of every transaction. You go to work for money. You go out on a date, you spend money. You live at home, spend money on rent or mortgage. You go to work, you pay for your car insurance and your gas and your car payment with money. Everything you do, basically all human actions, the other side of that action is money. And so to the extent that the value of that money is being artificially manipulated, you are sending incorrect signals about the scarcity and abundance of everything simply by just controlling the money. To the extent this takes place, it makes it near impossible to make correct financial decisions about the future because the information you're receiving about the scarcity and abundance of everything is wrong. And the biggest area this shows up is crowding out private credit. As Daniel Lacal points out on Mises.org, the Federal Reserve is killing the private sector right now because the government will always get the financing it needs. But this has a crowding out effect on the public sector, which means less productivity and weaker investment. To show how this works, we have to look at an extreme example. Say the federal government right now had interest rates of 30%, which means they borrow your money for 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, and they'd pay you 30% a year. Would you leave your money in the bank? Would you put your money in the S&P 500? Would you invest in gold? Would you invest in Bitcoin? Almost nobody would do any of that, and the only place money would flow would be to the government. This is what the crowding out effect means. It means the higher interest rates go, the higher interest rates the government is paying, the less capital is available for the private sector. The first people this crushes is small businesses. They have the smallest amount of capital to lean on and draw on in tough times, and they are invisible in the eyes of the public. And so small businesses get crushed first. Again, from the distortion of the money supply that is being sent to the economy by the Fed, money starts flowing to the government instead of the productive private sector, especially small businesses. This means large corporations are the survivors because they start to unnaturally and artificially absorb all of that business. They're the beneficiaries of this. They are not getting punished like the small businesses. This is also by design. If you are a government, you want more power, not less power. What is easier to exercise power over? A banking system with 6 banks or with 4,000 banks? Which is easier to exercise power over? An economy with a few large corporations that employ every single person, or an economy with hundreds of thousands of vibrant, small, local, city, and town-based small businesses that employ everybody on a decentralized basis? Large corporations absorb more and more of the economy and are wielded more and more by the government, leading to a condition where the state controls the flow of resources, where the state has undue influence over corporations, jobs, wages, prices, and who gets what. And when the state is coming in as a third party and dictating what two other people can do, whether they can or have to transact with each other and under what terms and at what prices, definitionally speaking, free markets have died. You have capitalism no more. Now, at this point, you may think that though interest rates are higher than they've been in years, they are nowhere near as high as they should be, and that may be true. But whether interest rates are lower than they should be or higher than they should be, the reality is they are different than they would be without exerting the control over the system. And that is where the damage comes from. As always, thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.